John 6. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd followed him because they had seen the signs he performed on the sick. Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the Jewish festival, was near. Lifting up his eyes and seeing that a great crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test Philip, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to have even a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, "There is a boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down, about 5,000 men. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were seated, as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the leftover pieces so that nothing is wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that Jesus had performed, they said, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and set off across the sea for Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the sea grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, approaching the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite side of the sea realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but that they had gone away alone. However, other boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Truly, truly, I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. Do not work for food that perishes, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has set his seal." Then they asked him, "What must we do to do the works God requires?" Jesus replied, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." So they asked him, "What sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, 'He gave them bread from heaven to eat.'" Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "always give us this bread." Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of all those he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day." At this, the Jews began to grumble about him, because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." They said, "Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, 'I came down from heaven'?" "Stop grumbling among yourselves," Jesus replied. "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, 'They will all be taught by God.' Everyone who has heard the Father and learned from him comes to me. No one has seen the Father except the one who is from God. Only he has seen the Father. Truly, truly, I tell you, whoever believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world." Then the Jews began to argue sharply among themselves, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your ancestors ate manna and died, but whoever feeds on this bread will live forever." He said this while teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. On hearing it, many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus asked them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? The Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. The words I have spoken to you, they are full of the Spirit and life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus had known from the beginning who did not believe and who would betray him. He went on to say, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled them." From that time many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Jesus asked the 12, "Do you also want to leave?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." Then Jesus replied, "Did I not choose you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil." He meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who, though one of the 12, was later to betray him.